All right, hello and welcome to the Ventures Land podcast, where I, George Atwell, attempt to learn all I can about conservation, ecology, land management, and hunting. Today on the podcast, I have Caleb Renyer. I think that's how you pronounce your last name, right? Awesome, awesome. So Caleb and I kind of met in an interesting fashion. He messaged me on Instagram like a link to one of his products. It was a camera arm for filming while hunting with a code. And then from there, we kind of just started talking back and forth. You were giving me different suggestions for what I should get with the camera arm and stuff. And then at the end of it, I was like, well, why don't you come on my podcast and we can just talk about uh, your brand and stuff, and then also just various hunting things. So, Caleb, why don't you tell us a little bit about RoamR hunting, what it is, what inspired you to do it, and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so about a year ago, well, not quite a year ago, actually. So kind of last August is when I started doing um, kind of 3D printing hunting products. I'd
Mm,
been in the 3D printing world since my eighth grade year. So I've been 3D printing about 3 years before I actually started making these hunting products.
nice.
It was at first I started out, I made mini models for several companies, and then I kind of transitioned into the hunting aspect of it, which
So you had
requires a lot.
lots of experience in 3D printing and stuff.
Correct. Yeah. So it wasn't anything new.
Yeah.
So I felt capable of making these products. Yeah. And that's kind of how I got started. So,
Yeah. And the goal of the company is to help mobile hunting become easier, right? It's kind of
yes,
what you
correct.
set out to
So
do.
when I started going mobile, I was like so overwhelmed with all the different things that you have to do, like just a bunch of different stuff that you wouldn't really think of, like where do you put your
Yeah.
climbing sticks, where do you hold this stuff. And so I
Hmm.
kind of wanted to make products to make that easier for everybody and also affordable for everybody because I'm still in high school. Like I understand that um, you want to get into hunting without spending a bunch of money. So
Yeah. No, and that's actually one big thing with the hunting industry is like as it's progressed, like it started out as like cheap, like anyone with a gun really could go out and hunt, and it was just super simple and easy. Whereas now it's like incredibly expensive. You have to have like $1,200 camo sets. If you want to go bow hunting, you have to have a really nice bow, all that kind of stuff. And there's so many little things that you have to buy just to be able to compete with everyone. And it's all just so expensive. So it's like
yeah,
it's
I
nice to have like new companies out there like yourself where it's like good products, a little bit on the cheaper side of things. And
yeah, for
also
sure.
like it's a certainly like I started mobile hunting last year with a saddle stand setup, and I was super basic. Like I just bought climbing sticks and a saddle, and I rigged my own rope system. But it was like figuring out a system and how long it would take me to get up into a tree. It was very complicated because I had my backpack with all my gear and stuff. I had my bow, I had my climbing sticks. I didn't even have a platform at the time, but it was still overwhelming. It was just like, where do
Yeah,
I put everything? When should I start like putting stuff out for like hanging my bow, all that kind of stuff? It was just a complicated process that I was very much overwhelmed with. And then going into this season, I'm going to start actually filming my hunts and stuff, which is going to add even more because now I'm going to have all my hunting essentials with me and my camera equipment. So it's like,
yeah, for sure. I mean, that's kind of the exact same thing that I experienced, just the overwhelming aspect of trying to get into it. There's just a lot of moving pieces that you wouldn't understand. So
yeah. And it's like, I mean, uh, to like this, I mean, in the saddle stand aspect of it, it's meant to be like a pretty simple, easy process for most like public land hunters, where it's like, yeah, you don't have to bring in a ladder stand or like these complicated hang on stands and stuff. It's like super easy, set up in 15 minutes. But the thing is like you do have to practice it a lot. So that's
oh,
one thing that I'm doing on the off season here, besides just shooting my bow, is like figuring out a quick and easy system that's specified towards myself to get up into the tree as quick as possible, you know,
Yeah,
because
I
it's
agree.
just like it's just another aspect of practicing, you know. It's like shooting your bow is a big thing of making yourself accurate and stuff, but if you're not quiet getting in the morning, and quiet leaving in the evening, it's like you can mess up your hunt in that self, you know.
Exactly. Yeah.
So how long have you been hunting yourself?
So I killed my first deer, my 8th grade year.
Oh, nice.
Um,
I think,
so that would be
yeah.
8th grade freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. So this is going to be my 5th year of kind of deer hunting.
Hmm.
But as far as just getting out in the woods and shooting rabbits with a 22, I mean, I've just enjoyed that like my whole
Yeah.
life. I mean, just
Yeah.
getting out and yeah. So,
Is it a family thing for you guys, or is it kind of just something you were interested in?
it's really not like my dad doesn't hunt. He does real crop farming.
Okay.
But my grandpa kind of got me into deer hunting and got me my first gun and stuff. And then that obviously led to getting into bow and getting into mobile hunting. So
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah. Do you hunt on private land then, or are you public land hunter?
I do a mix. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at too. Like we have a wonderful piece of property in Southwest Wisconsin. It's 160 acres and it's like pristine whitetail hunting, you know?
Yep. Yep.
Um, but I do enjoy the aspect of public land hunting as well, you know.
I
It's
really
like,
enjoy the mobile aspect of both of it now that I am kind of going completely mobile. I don't have any really like true setups that are just there. So yeah.
yeah. Yeah, no, it's like, and I think the way that we're gonna try and handle it on our private piece, we haven't talked about it so much, but we're gonna have like your normal ladder stand setups on key areas where we just know deer are gonna be, but also we want the flexibility of a mobile setup where it's like, you know, I am tending to see deer hanging out in this area, so maybe I should go over and sit there. Or if I do want to sit in one of the areas where the ladder stands is set up, but the wind's not right for that day, I can position myself accordingly in that area with the ladder stand, you know?
Sure. Yeah.
So one of the things I always like asking people who hunt in a different state for me is like, what's like the hunting atmosphere down there? Like, is there a lot of people that are into it? And like, how serious is it over there in Kansas?
So I'd say it's pretty serious down here. Where I'm at, there's a lot of public ground around me. So that's obviously good until there's a bunch of people the first week of November, when
Yeah,
there's a bunch of people in here trying to, and it just becomes like a little overwhelming with all the people that are down here sometimes.
yeah,
Um, and that's kind of where I'd say it's super competitive. Um, in that aspect, there's people getting to spots outrageously early,
hmm,
because they know that there's going to be other people trying to get there. But then again, it's also like I'd say very friendly and competitive at the same time. Like I'm going to congratulate somebody that shot a nice buck, obviously, and that's how someone would
yeah,
congratulate me if I shot a nice buck too. So
yeah. But like most people tend to like there's not very much nonchalant hunting. Like, oh, I'm just gonna throw it a bait pile and see what happens. Or most people like in it to win it.
I would say the people that are hunting public from so most of the people that are hunting public aren't from around here.
Okay.
They're maybe an hour away or so. Those people are like serious. They're completely mobile.
Hmm.
They're hopefully passing mature bucks. Well, they're
Yeah.
hopefully passing bucks to get to the mature buck, obviously. Um, but then I'd say there's also some gun hunters around here that are just putting out a bait pile and shooting
Yeah.
the 110-inch buck that walks in front of them.
Yeah. Yeah. And like here in Wisconsin, it's very mixed, I would say. Like it depends where you go. But if you're in a more of like a farming area, so like down south, I would say there's more of the aspect of just going out for gun season and just shooting a doe or something or shooting a small buck and not really the big buck atmosphere. But
Yeah,
like over
sure.
where we are, there's a lot more of like food plotters, people who are like designing their properties and trying to raise big bucks and stuff. So it's like it's a very mixed atmosphere, and it kind of just depends where you are of like how serious people are taking it. And then like, but I would say most people respect it for what it is, and they kind of just try and help each other out, and there's not a huge amount of like resentment towards someone that shoots a big buck, you know, like, oh my gosh, why didn't he walk by my stand and why didn't I shoot him? It's like most people are pretty friendly in that sense.
Agree. Yeah, I'd have to agree.
Yeah. So one of the things that you wanted me to talk about was deer management, right?
Yeah, so just kind of like I said, our younger generation, obviously we are the next generation of hunters. I'm 17, you're 16. And just kind of I would like people to understand more of like letting a buck go that needs another year, right? Now obviously on that's going to be way easier to do on public. Not on private, sorry, because on public, you know, if you pass it, the next guy might shoot it. Which is kind of the scary part. That's kind of the hard part about it. But just we're the next generation. I think we could like put an emphasis on our generation could be really good at managing bucks as good as they should be managed, basically.
Yeah, and I would say a large part of it comes down to it's kind of just like producing a better atmosphere of it, you know, of just like I feel like most hunters tend to take hunting for granted, you know, like it's almost a privilege that we have, and it's like something that we're just always going to have and tend to just take it for granted and don't really care almost about those sorts of things. But like there certainly needs to be more of not necessarily like a big buck atmosphere, but just taking care of the deer herd itself and maintaining it to be healthy. Because one of the things I messaged you about was even the big buck hunters tend to like only shoot like those big, massive 5.5 to 6.5-year-old bucks, and that's all they're going for. But
And
they
that's
forget,
yeah,
and they forget that like, oh, what about the overall deer population? You know, and that's very like broken down to your location and what's going on around you. Where it's like if you're overpopulated, then yeah, you're gonna want to take a couple does. If you're underpopulated, then you want to let more does go. And then, yeah, you definitely want to be targeting that 5.5, 6.5-year-old buck where they've already passed their genes on and that sort of stuff. But like, yeah, in an overpopulated area, it's kind of just bring down the population by any means necessary, you know, where it's like down here, we're trying to shoot 5 does this year, which is kind of a lot. And as far as bucks go, we're targeting the older age class bucks. And yeah, it's kind of just like having a deeper respect and almost sense of this isn't something to be taken for granted for, and it needs to be managed well, you know, of just like creating that kind of atmosphere. And I would, even just like with how hard you hunt, like I know people who, though they go out bow hunting and they don't even sight in their bow. They just shoot it a couple times at a target, and then they're like, oh, I'm just going to move it 6 inches down and 6 inches to the right as to wherever I want the arrow to hit on the deer. And it's like, we need to eliminate more of that kind of stuff and more of a respect for hunting, you know?
Yeah, I agree 100%.
It's just like, and I mean, a piece of that kind of just comes from how serious you want to take it. You know, like some guys are just like, you know what? I don't really care what I shoot. Like if I shoot a young buck, don't really care. But it's like, then honestly, you maybe shouldn't be hunting, and you should leave it towards someone who is going to care more, because it's just like people need to have a greater care for it, I think is where it all comes down to. And as far as like figuring out whether you are overpopulated, if you have like, if you're on private land, if you're a farmer and you plant crops and stuff, how hard are your crops getting hammered by deer? Otherwise, planting food plots is a good way of figuring out, okay, is it overpopulated? Because then your food plot is just going to get hammered, you know? Where
Yeah.
it's like, if your food plot isn't reaching full maturity because all the plants in it are getting hammered too early on, then there's a pretty good chance that you're overpopulated. So finding food sources and seeing how heavily they're getting fed upon is probably the best way to figure out if you're overpopulated, if you're in a new area. Otherwise, it's kind of just year to year observing of like, I am seeing a decent amount more deer this year than I have been before. Or man, the deer are just really skinny this year, Um, and then also like right now it's July 2nd, I think today. And we are already saying that we want to shoot 5 does this year. Well, that can change, if we're hunting in October and we're like, man, we're actually not seeing as many does and deer in general as we thought, then maybe we drop that number down to 3,
Yeah.
So it's good to have like
Yeah.
flexibility in it almost. And then like doe to buck ratio is a whole nother thing that is a concept I don't wholly understand myself. But yeah, you kind of have to feel it out for yourself. I know some guys like to do like a trail cam survey and stuff, and that works, but it's kind of, my stance on ecology isn't necessarily wholly scienced where it's like plug numbers into an equation to get a number of your total population back and then figuring out your carrying capacity from there. It's more of just feeling it out,
Yeah, I'd agree. Looking at, body sizes of deer and how
Mhm.
much they're eating the food source and that kind of thing. So,
Yeah. And even I actually, prior to coming on here, I posted my last week's podcast. I did it with a DNR biologist, Aaron Larson, on CWD. And one of the things that we were talking about with land management and managing your land for reduced CWD numbers is talking with your neighbors. Is honestly, when I'm reading all these different land management books, whether it's forestry, food plots, all those kinds of things, it's just talking with your neighbors, building a relationship and seeing what they're doing and seeing how you can work together, where it's like,
yeah,
especially if you are a small landowner of like 40 to 80 acres, if you want to have good good deer health, and have big bucks, you need to be talking with your neighbors and you need to be figuring out a management plan with them of just like, okay, what are we doing this year? What are we all seeing? And just figuring stuff out from there. It's super important to have good relationships with your neighbors and just trying to figure out a system that works for everyone and how can we meet everyone's goals. That's
yeah, for sure.
one of the benefits we have for down here is we got pretty lucky on that end. Our neighbors are really nice. So
Yeah, I'd have to agree on that one for sure. Just communicating with the properties around you can really help both
Mhm.
parties, and especially to understand the buck's movement. Like during rut, we had a buck travel 5 miles overnight in Kansas, and we
Wow.
wouldn't have been able to figure that out if I wasn't talking to my neighbors, communicating, seeing what they're seeing on trail cam, and that's really just going to help us understand the deer population and the deer herd more by communicating like that. So.
Yeah, and it's like we were talking before, like hunting atmosphere, like sharing what kind of strategies are you doing with like your food plots? Like where are you putting your food plots and why? Which areas on your property are like a sanctuary where you're just never going in there and stuff? It's like figuring out what your neighbors are doing in that sense to help implement your own strategies and then communicate that to them and telling them what you're seeing, where you're seeing it, and how your season's going. And even like if you shoot a deer, involving your neighbors with recovery. It's like, hey, Niall, I've just shot like a big buck. Can you help me track it? Even if you have 5 or 6 guys at your house by yourself, it's cool to include them on that.
I'd agree. Yeah.
So what sorts of, so do you hunt on your dad's farm then for your private land or?
So the public that I hunt on actually isn't my dad's. It's It's a cattle farmer's that lives in the area, and he has a big patch of blocked up timber, and there's a
Nice.
lot of timber around it. So I got on that, and I pretty much leave it alone as far as land management,
Mm-hmm.
um, because there's a lot of ag fields around.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
they're using that as their food source already. So I have to pattern the deer based on those food sources,
Mm-hmm.
um, and based on like just their normal movement. So
And how many acres is that ranch?
the property that I'm hunting on is about 40 acres of timber,
Okay.
and then it'd be like another 80 acres of row crop.
Nice.
And then there's also probably another 1 to 200 acres of timber on the surrounding properties.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely a heavy timber area, and so
Yeah.
there's a lot of bucks in this area, and it's really tricky to pattern them and find them out unless I'm communicating with neighbors on where the bucks are. So
Yeah. One of my favorite places to hunt in Wisconsin is up north in the Northwoods on the Nicolet or Shigamigan Nicolet National Forest. It's just straight up woods. It's all woods, and it's just beautiful. And it's a lot harder to hunt up there because it's all woods, so it's like harder to find and get into deer. But it's so cool up there.
yeah, that's kind of one thing I learned this year is hunting elevation changes on ridges. It's like what you're
Yeah.
talking about, and when it's just timber, I kind of I think I learned a lot about hunting ridges just by going on Onyx Hunt and turning on
Hmm.
the satellite view with the elevation changes and hunting on those bold lines where the elevation, where it's like a defined elevation changes. That's where those deer are
Yeah.
walking most of the time on the ridges because it's the easiest walk because it's the same elevation.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And yeah, we live in the hill country, so we're gonna have to worry about all that kind of stuff. And it like we just got the farm this year, so we're gonna have to worry about elevation changes, not to mention how the wind reacts to the valleys and stuff and swirls, and then also like thermals and all of that. So it's like a completely different ballpark in that
Yeah, well,
sense.
thermals are just absolutely crazy. I mean, you can get into so much stuff with thermals and playing them the right way. Like that's kind of what I had to do this year. Um, like they're obviously such a key aspect to hunting, and
Hmm.
if you really pay attention to them, you can use it to your advantage so well. So
Yeah. How do you use them typically?
so this year, I have one really good hunting mentor that he was kind of walking me through how I was gonna kind of do this hunt that I was planning on doing. The weather was looking
Hmm.
fantastic for this day, October 28th, and I knew what spot I wanted to go to for the wind that was predicted. And so my mentor he kind of told me, he was like, okay, since these deer are going to be traveling north of you and below your elevation, you're going to actually want to get in after the sun starts coming up.
Yep.
Which what that does is it's going to turn the thermals from dropping to rising. So since
Hmm.
I was hunting above where the deer were going to be, I had to get in after, or I had to get in when the thermals were going up instead of down,
Yeah,
basically.
that makes sense.
So I couldn't get scented, and that's I truly believe that's how I killed my deer because I was halfway up the tree putting my climbing sticks on, and a doe walked right over my path,
Huh.
like a doe walked directly downwind of me and
Yeah.
they didn't react at all. And then I actually killed my buck that was chasing that doe 10 minutes later. So it all happened very fast. Like I was still kind of getting set up when the buck came in. And I truly believe that if I would have gone in there super early, those does would have gone there and I would have been scented because I would have left um, so much scent behind
Yeah.
and they would have blew and I would have never killed the buck that day. So it was just a very well executed plan. And those are the best kind of hunts, the ones that you plan to perfection and it actually
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah. No, it is kind of crazy how much like access really does matter. And here our like main house is positioned like in the middle of the property, which is not ideal at all.
Yeah.
And given how much land we have, 160 acres, which isn't a lot, but you can't really get into a spot without spooking deer. So it's kind of like, okay, morning spots are really going to have to just tend to be the ones closest to the house in my mind, of just like, yeah, might not be the spot where you're going to shoot a buck, but if you want to go shoot a doe, it's going to be pretty good. But you're not going to be spooking as much in the morning then. And then evening is really where you want to plan your access better, where it's like, okay, if I expect deer to be in this food plot at between 5 and 7, well, then I'm getting in at like 12 to 1, and just making sure that like I'm not messing up anything in that sense, So
Yeah, for sure.
access is definitely one thing that people tend to, I guess, forget about, and I've tended to forget about in the past with hunting. But it seems like it worked out for you pretty good in that moment. Because if I'm thinking the same buck, I saw, was it the one that you posted about?
Yeah.
That was a pretty nice buck, and you shot that last season.
Yeah, I shot that this October 28th. So yeah, last season.
Nice. So is that the pre-rut around there, or is that kind of getting into the
So
rut then?
it was pre-rut. He was following those. I don't think he was necessarily like chasing like
Yeah.
you would find chasing in rut. So it was
Yeah.
just like probably 3 days before rut really kind of kicked in, November 1st. That whole week they were really going, they're
Hmm.
really running pretty hard. So
Nice. Yeah. That's the other thing of like, we used to hunt on Washington Island, and I had like 2 years hunting experience over there, which is in northeast Wisconsin, but now we're in southwest Wisconsin. And we're gonna have to figure out all that sort of timing over again of like when the rut's gonna start to kick off. Like you can pretty much follow the same game plan of like November 1st is typically the most ideal, or the first week in November is the most ideal, but ultimately it's like you kind of just have to figure out the exact timing of it, But it's pretty
yeah,
safe bet to just say the first week in November.
yeah, that's kind of something that I feel really blessed with. Is I have a mentor. Like my dad obviously doesn't hunt, but there's a guy that he really, I mean, he taught me basically everything I know. I wouldn't even know about
Yeah.
thermals or access, switching up access, doing all those things if it wasn't kind of for him. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, I mean, that's just, I'm so lucky to have someone like him that
Yeah.
kind of shows me the ropes.
No, I like, my dad doesn't hunt either, but I have a brother who hunts, a brother-in-law that hunts, and then an uncle he's the guy that hunts up in the Northwoods, and he's probably, in my opinion, the best hunter in the family. But I'm just like surrounded by extremely knowledgeable people, who are just willing to show me everything they know, and even the neighbors around here are super, super generous, and are like, if you have any questions at all of certain situations, or if you want help planning stuff, like just let us know, So it's like
Yeah.
having people in your life to be able to teach you those kinds of things is like monumental difference, because otherwise we just have to learn it all on our own, and that would take years.
Correct. Yeah, I don't want to try to learn everything that I've been taught
Yeah.
at school. Like, it just takes so much time, so much
Yeah.
failing
Yeah.
to get to where I am now. So,
Yeah. And even it's like in our current day, like there's so many books out there, podcasts out there, and videos out there explaining all these different types of things. And like, yeah, everything's situational, but they kind of give you pretty good guidelines to figure stuff out on your own, like Jeff Sturgis, in terms of like property management and that sort of stuff, of like where to put your food plots, where to put your stands, access, water holes, all that kind of stuff. He's one of the bigger guys that I follow. And even, I mean, like you can't learn a ton from watching stuff like Meat Eater, where it's just like entertainment, but you
yep.
can kind of like see different situations and all of that, of like, oh, like deer was coming this way, so he did this, but they don't
Mhm.
necessarily explain strategies. But there's just so many resources out there where it's like you can gain 15 years worth of hunting knowledge in 2 years. And it's like the
Yeah.
experience isn't there, and experience is arguably better. But like you can kind of gain all that sort of stuff from just listening and
If
watching stuff.
if you want to learn it, it's available for you to learn. It's kind of kind of the thing.
Yeah.
And that's I also can credit a lot of my time spent watching like YouTube and that stuff. And then I was still
Hmm.
making, like, I was spending a lot of time. So I was spending a lot of time doing all that, and then I still didn't have luck my freshman year bow hunting.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of the, you got to get out there and you got to fail sometimes,
Yeah.
um, to ultimately get it done. So
Yeah. No, and I mean, like, I could probably design a pretty good hunt for someone to do given a certain set of circumstances, but like actually going out and doing it is a whole nother thing of like how quiet are you being, what is the deer doing, and trying to read what he's going to do next and figure all that kind of stuff out. It's like, yeah, you can know what to do just thinking it in your head, but to actually go out and do it is just a whole nother thing. And that's where the experience comes in, of just,
yeah, well, you can't watch on YouTube how to set up your sticks super quiet
mhm,
and get in without movement,
yeah,
and yeah, just how to execute a shot perfectly. Like, you can't
yeah,
YouTube that. You gotta just do it. So
yeah. Like I had, I think it was 2 years ago, it was my first year bow hunting. And I had, I think it was like November 6th or 8th. It was right around there. So it was like right in the peak part of the rut on Washington Island. And I had gotten into my stand pretty early. And my plan was I knew where a couple of bucks would be bedding. So I was just going to rattle and grunt call all
yep,
morning long. And I was sitting on the edge of a cedar forest. So it was like pretty thick and I really couldn't see super far ahead of me. Um, and this one buck had walked past my stand, maybe 40 yards in front of me with his head down. That's the only way I saw that he was a buck. That's how low my visibility was.
wow,
And he ended up walking past me, and then I just kept grunt calling and rattling and stuff a little bit more aggressively. And then he circled back and came back, and he was 30 yards away head on. And I decided to stand up and pull my bow back at 30 yards away head on. So, and then like, so he like just stuck up his head and was like staring right into my soul. And I panicked and just pulled, pulled the trigger and shot him. And he ended up turning to the left. He didn't duck at all, but he turned to the left and I hit him probably pretty good in the lungs, but like it wasn't where I wanted to hit him or anything like that. And it was with a 50-pound bow at 30 yards. So the penetration just wasn't there. But then I was so down on myself. And so I knew that I had like messed up and I probably wouldn't recover the deer, that I got down immediately and went and just tried to look for blood right after I shot the deer. And
yeah,
then looking back on it, when we actually tried like 3 hours later to track him, we saw right where he bedded down, and there was like good lung blood and all that kind of stuff. And honestly, if I hadn't gotten out of the stand and walked over to where I had shot him, very well could have found that buck within 100 yards. Like he was bleeding a lot, and it was lung blood and stuff. So it was honestly, the buck probably would have died. But we ended up tracking him like a mile and a half, and it was just awful. You
yeah.
know?
No, I actually have a very similar, very very similar story. My 8th grade year, I killed a deer with a gun.
Hmm.
My freshman year, I had a mission Raddick and I was pulling about 45 pounds.
Yeah.
Um, and I had a buck that was perfectly broadside. I hit it. It was a very well executed shot. I just didn't get the penetration. I
Yeah.
think I probably got one lung, but I did the exact same thing. I got down, looked for blood, and about 150 yards later, I found a really, really big bed of
Yeah.
lung blood, just like you described. And then we tracked them forever and couldn't end up finding them. So it's kind of the exact same situation you described, that we both kind of did the same thing. So
Yeah.
uh,
Of just like, even if you think the shot's awful and even if you think you completely missed the deer, just give yourself at
yeah.
least 30 minutes, and then go and check for blood and stuff. If you hear a tractor, I'm outside. Um,
Oh,
and
it's okay.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
so like, that's just a good example of like, it was a well executed hunt right up until I had to shoot the deer, you know? Like I
Yep, and
actually, it was my first year bow hunting, and I actually called in a pretty decent buck and ended up being able to get a shot, but it was just executed poorly, you know?
those are the things you can't YouTube, right? You can't
Yeah.
you can figure out how to rattle and grunt the buck in, but as far as the experience part of it, you actually have to go out and do it,
Yeah.
like you both described. So
Yeah. And the one buck that I had actually shot the year prior was on Thanksgiving with a gun. And I had gotten into my stand, and I was there for maybe 10 minutes, and then I started fiddling around with the chair I was in, and I like was raising it, trying to find a good level for it, and messing around, just making tons of noise. And then I ended up having, as soon as I had figured out where I wanted the chair to be, which took me like 30 minutes, I looked out and I saw a buck maybe 60 yards away starting to walk by me. And I was able to get a shot off on him, but I was like, yeah, that was probably not great fiddling around with my chair that much and stuff. But yeah, it was kind of just figuring all that sort of stuff out is crucial.
yeah, well, I agree. Getting comfortable. So
And then it was funny because it was the gun season that I had shot that buck that I didn't recover. And I had just gotten out of my stand to go eat lunch. And as soon as I got on the ground, there was a doe that ended up running perpendicular to where I was. So like across from where I was looking.
yep,
And she stopped. So I pulled my gun up next to a tree and shot her. But the issue is I had followed her in my scope for so long that I didn't actually look with my eyes outside of the scope where she was. So
okay,
I was like, well, I know that she ran cross me, you know? So I just walked straight into that direction until I found her tracks and then followed them up till I saw blood. But the issue is once again, I immediately went out and started
yep,
looking for blood, you know?
yeah,
Which that deer we did end up recovering. But we did once again found where she had bedded, and I ended up spooking her again. Whereas she could
wow,
have died within 50 yards, but she ended up dying within like 200, you know? So yeah, it's
yeah,
kind of just two cases in the same year of the same thing, you know, where it's
yep,
kind of just like, yeah, maybe just calm down a little bit. One thing I was thinking about today, and this is going back to like a hunting atmosphere, you know,
yep,
when the work starts to hit, there's kind of a lot of complaining from people, you know, where it's like out west, you kind of hear a lot of people complaining about like, oh yeah, I just shot this big bull elk, but now I've got to pack out 300 pounds of meat and stuff. And it's like,
yep, yep.
dude,
I
you
like not
just
to work.
shot a bull elk. Like, have a little bit of like gratefulness instead of like, oh my gosh, I gotta pack out 300 pounds of meat for a mile and a half, which don't get me wrong is super hard and challenging. I've never done it before, but I'm sure it's not easy. But at the same time, it's like, okay, but you did just get an opportunity to do something that most people will never have,
Yep,
you know? So it's like kind of just having a deeper respect for it in that sense of like, yeah, I could complain about this, or I could just be grateful for the situation I'm in, you know?
yeah, for sure. Yep,
And even just like qualms between like, oh, out west hunters kind of say that like whitetail hunting is super easy and stuff, but it's like I don't think people get how hard it is to predict just off of like terrain and scouting and stuff of predicting when and where a deer is going to be. So it's like, yeah, I can plant a food plot and try and like coax deer to go into that area. But now I have to figure out if I'm hunting a specific buck, all right, when is that buck going to be there?
yep,
Which is a whole nother thing of just like, because you can't hunt day after day after day in the same spot because then you're leaving scent, you know, and the deer's just not going to go there at all. So it's like
yeah.
you really have one opportunity to shoot that deer, you know?
Yeah, that's really on a mature buck. You really have one opportunity in one spot. Well, like,
Yeah.
and you're only going to get one opportunity at that certain spot with a mature buck.
Yeah.
Um,
It's, I don't know.
and
I
and
feel
the
like people,
opportunity, you might not even see him. He might get downwind of you, circle downwind of you before you even know it, and you'll never even know that you missed your opportunity, that he already kind of figured out what you're doing. So
yeah, it's like, it's also like some people are like, oh, I didn't spook any deer and stuff. And I was like, yeah, there's a pretty good chance that maybe you did. You just didn't see the deer,
yeah, they
you
circled
know?
downwind of you and got your wind before you even knew it. So
Yeah. It's like, yeah, maybe the reason why you didn't see them is because they already knew you were there before you were there, you know?
yep, yep. Like that's kind of the things you can get by picking uh, the same entry every time,
Hmm.
same
Yeah, it's
access.
like they just learn where you're going to be when you're going to be there. And that's why it's like, even with trail cameras and stuff, it's like, yeah, you probably really should only be checking trail cameras about once a month at the most, you know?
You guys
When
run
I,
any cams?
huh?
Do you guys use any cell cams, or can you use cell cams?
We do use cell cams, yeah. But like they're just so expensive for 160 acres that like we have to have SD card cams. Like we maybe have 4 cell cams.
So how many cams do you think you run?
Uh, I think right now, excluding the cell cams, we have 8 or 9 out, I think.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
no,
like,
you really want to be checking those once a month, because if you leave
yeah,
too much scent out there, they are literally never going to go back. So
yeah, no, it's and even like when I first put out cameras up on Washington Island, I the first ever photo I had pulled from an SD card was a pretty decent buck, about 110 inches maybe, which for the island is
yep.
just huge because you average about 80 to 90 inches for a buck up there, you know? So it's like anything that's in the triple digits is just massive. But
Yeah.
then I then decided it'd be smart to go and check the camera every single day, trying to find a photo of them again. And all of a sudden, I went from having 200 photos after leaving it there for 1 week to like no photos every week, you know, because I was going out to that same spot every day trying to
Okay.
find more photos. It was just, yeah. Which, yeah, now it's like, it's kind of a lot to go out and get all of my cards. It's honestly, it's like a 3-hour endeavor. Um,
Yeah.
if I want to get all the cards, and with all the work on the farm and stuff, I just can't afford to do that. Like that's way too much time. So I tend to
Yeah.
break it up into like 4 quadrants of the property, you know, of just like, all right, I'm going to get these ones today, these ones tomorrow, these ones the day after, and these ones the day after, you know,
Yeah, for sure.
and just finding little stuff like that kind of helps. How many cameras do you guys have?
So I just have 3 right now. And that is, I'm severely under cameraed.
Yeah.
Um, for the properties that for the accesses to the properties that I hunt. But
Hmm.
my the guy that mentors me, he hunts some of the similar properties surrounding it. So like I'll kind of know when bucks are in the area from pictures that he'll send me.
Yeah.
Um, so combined, we probably have about 8 cameras. So that's obviously 8 cameras that I have access to see what's on them, basically.
Yeah. I will say, like, some people do put their faith too much in trail cameras, where
Yeah.
it's like they tend to just chase trail cameras, you know,
Yep.
which it's like, yeah, you can probably shoot deer off of that, but it's not really all that efficient. And like when you put out a camera, you don't realize how little the camera is actually seeing,
Yep.
you know? Like, yeah, if you're getting a photo of a buck in a spot once a week consistently, it's like he may just be right there once a week consistently, but maybe he's like 10 yards to the left out of the view of that camera every day, you know?
Yeah.
So it's like there is so much that a camera just isn't able to see, where it's like, yeah, if you had 50 cameras, you would know a lot more than what you would know with 3, but at the same time, it's good to be able to hunt without as much of that as possible, you know?
Yeah, I agree. I just kind of want to see like what bucks are in the area, and then as far as patterning them goes, you kind of have to get out there and
Yeah.
actually see what they do, because cameras, I mean, they're not telling you the full story. I think everyone can agree on that. So
Yeah. Like my uncle up north, he's been up there for I don't even know how long, probably most of his life, but he just knows the area so well at this point where he can just pick a spot on a certain day and be like, guarantee you're going to see deer there. And then he just goes there and he shoots a buck and stuff. And it's like, it's just incredible of just getting to know the area that you're hunting is honestly just the most crucial part above everything else, you know?
oh, for sure. Yeah, I agree.
Like that mentor you're talking about, how long has he been hunting that area?
So this particular area since about 2018, he's been in the area. He killed a 195-inch buck in 2019.
Oh, wow.
Which for yeah, I mean it's a brute. I mean for
Yeah.
Kansas, it's just I mean Kansas has really big bucks. Is kind of what I'm saying. It's
Yeah.
not unheard of for Kansas. I mean ever since 2019. Well, actually starting back in 2016, about a mile away from my house, there was a 216-inch non-typical.
Oh,
Um,
gosh.
yeah, I mean it's prime country out here.
Yeah.
And then last year there was a 170-inch buck that was harvested off of private or public land actually, which is just the crazy part about it.
Yeah.
It's
How many
Kansas.
inches was the one that you shot?
I think it was 135 to 140. It was super wide.
Yeah.
And then obviously
No, it
pretty
was a
tall.
super solid buck.
Yeah, no, it was. I was super pumped up with it. I mean, I had a Montreal camera, um, and I was just. It was crazy. Just I looked up after seeing those two does because I heard something, and then I
Mhm.
saw that buck, and I was like, "Oh my gosh! Like there it is! Like he's. Okay, I'm gonna get an opportunity to shoot this one." And
Yeah.
yeah.
No, that's awesome. Yeah. I like how old was he?
I think he was 4.5.
Four and a half. Yeah. Honestly, to
Or,
me,
or
age matters way more than like antler size. You know,
yep.
it's like, yeah, it's impressive when you have like a big rack on the wall and stuff, but it's like honestly, it's like how old was that deer? You know? um,
Well, yeah, it can be way
like
harder
we
to kill a mature deer than a like an
yeah,
older
like
one that has less
we
antler.
have
But
yeah, that's yeah, we have a buck on camera who's 5.5 year old. I think he might be 6.5 this year now. But he would not score very well. Like he would maybe score in like the 140 range, which is
yeah,
still like it's huge, but like he's not a monster, you know. Um,
yeah, no, yeah.
and we have another buck on camera that would score who's like 4.5, who would score about 150 maybe. So it's
Yep.
like honestly, I'd rather score the or rather shoot the 6.5 year old because he's 6.5 years old over the one that's 155 inches, but as a 4.5 year old, you know, it's just
Right.
like that matters to me more the age of the deer, you know?
Well, yeah, that should matter. That's good buck management there. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's good buck management. It's more difficult. And yeah, it's just all around better. But it's like it's fine if like someone's like, yeah, he's 4.5 years old, but he's got more inches of antler on him. So I would rather take him because 4.5 year olds is
that is,
right around the age that you can target them in my mind
especially
with
if it's public. Especially if it's public, that is
oh yeah.
great.
Yeah. No, yeah, public land hunting, honestly, if you are able to shoot a 3.5 year old buck on depending the size of the public land, if it's like 500 acres, 3.5 year old buck's pretty good. If it's like a couple thousand, you could probably find older bucks than that, you know?
Well, they're gonna. I mean, they're gonna be hard to kill, but I think they're out there.
Yeah. It's well, I guess why I say that is because I feel like on public land that's like thousands of acres, like a national forest,
Yep.
you can always find your spot where there's going to be limited amounts of people and it's like relatively untouched.
Yes, I see what you're saying. Where you can hike far enough, basically.
Yeah.
Get
Like,
back there.
I mean, that's like all Cameron Haynes does with his elk hunting. Like, he's just like, yeah, I could go in 15 miles or I could go in 30, you know? So it's like that kind of resolve is kind of what you need to shoot big bucks on a national forest, instead of just complaining about like, oh my gosh, all the pressure around here. It's like, you could just go in farther, you know? But some people just don't have that level of commitment, and that's fine, you know?
I agree.
Yeah. Well, dude, thank you for coming on the show. I got a lot of stuff to do yet today, so
Yep, me too. Thanks for the invite. I really appreciate it. So
yeah, no, come on whenever you want. It was awesome. Thanks.
yeah, sounds good, man. Thank you.
Yep. All right, you guys, that was Caleb Renyer. I think that's, once again, how you pronounce his last name. Make sure to go check out, before you do anything for me, go check out his website, RoamR Hunting. Check out some of his products with just trying to make mobile hunting easier. It's really great, awesome stuff. He makes it all himself with, I believe, 3D printing is what he said. And yeah, it's just really awesome, great products. Young guy, so you should go over and support him and buy some of his stuff. Check out his Instagram, follow him there. And then also make sure to share his stuff with all of your friends and family, and do the same for me. Thank you.